you know, not super stock. Normally they would play, what's the level up?
Core Home Commander.
Core Home Commander in that slot, but Phantasmal Image, you know, once you have 8 copies of the 2-mana Lord, then Phantasmal Image copying that is a lot more reliable. So
and that was a card that kind of hit the scene when Gristlebrand started to really tear things up with the Animator as a way to kill that or copy Lords and slide underneath on those underground seas. But Gristlebrand has kind of died down a little bit, and this deck has died down as a result, but we see Brian having a nice tournament with it thus far.
On the other side, we have Nick Carlson playing Esper Stoneblade, the old standby, old trusty, one of the decks that has been, I don't want to say at the top, but near the top of the format for a while now. Basically, since Stoneforge Mystics printing, Stoneblade variants have existed, and I believe it was Tom Martell's Grand Prix winning deck that was the first real big finish for the Esper variations, basically splashing Lingering Souls.
Yeah. And so we do see Nick actually casting the namesake card of the deck, excuse me, and Stoneblade Mystic going to search out an Umezawa's Jeet, and you have Brian Boss playing a Merfolk.
We're going Jeet. That's how we're gonna say that card. Jeet.
How would you like me to pronounce it?
Jeet.
Jeet. I know that you
Japanese. Jeet.
You want me to pronounce it Jeet?
Yeah.
Jeet.
Or Jit, which would be the English. There's no universe where it's pronounced Jeet.
Jeet.
So a couple of removal spells, exactly what you want against Merfolk. And Jit, or Jite, is also quite effective against the blue men, and looks like it's going to be flashed in off of Stoneforge Mystic's second ability, and likely suited up and sent in after that. And once you got counters on a Jit,
yeah, it's
real hard to win.
It's really hard to win when there are 2 counters on Umezawa's Jite, which is a card that we're going to bring up on the screen here for you guys.
This one has a lot of words, a lot of abilities, and has ruined / dominated many different formats. Now it's sort of resigned to a legacy staple, but we're actually going to see
no Jit.
Batterskull.
Baiterskull.
Baiterskill.
Well, no, that's a fun token right there.
That is a germ.
That is a germ.
And
it's ugly.
Best of both worlds.
Yeah, this is.
And we're done here.
I've had just about enough here. Now, in all honesty, one of the things as we see a very one-sided beatdown there by Nick Carlson, Brian Boss did have the opportunity to Force of Will that Stoneblade Mystic.
What?
Chose not to. Yeah, he did have Force of Will and blue cards in his hand. Elected not to.
Are you sure?
I'm 100% positive.
That seems like a poor choice.
Well, that was what we call a game-losing decision.
Yes. That is a blunder,
yes,
as they say.
And I don't think that's one that we're going to see again here.
I can't imagine. Actually, while we're talking about Merfolk used to be one of the more dominant decks, like 2 years ago? But one of the biggest reasons that it dropped off was the the blue-white Stoneblade decks. Not only because Stoneforge Mystic, they don't really have that efficient of an answer. Batterskull, obviously, pretty unfair. Jit, one of the best cards against them. But also the access to 4 Swords to Plowshares, plus paths in the sideboard, plus a lot of them were playing Snapcaster Mages.
Yep.
Like, I don't know, it's just all of the cards that were good against Merfolk were all played in the same deck. That was the most played deck and one of the most dominant decks.
Yeah, the first versions of the blue-white Stoneblade decks were super hateful against Merfolk decks and actually just pushed them out of the format, because once a Batterskull does get into play, Merfolk has a very, very difficult time beating that. And then, of course, if there's an Umezawa's Jite involved as well, it's a wrap, which was exactly what we saw in that previous game.
Yep,
so.
And he had a couple of plows as well, and he does have Snapcaster Mages. So it's just actual nightmare matchup, and, you know, Merfolk being super popular was why Stoneblade first was the deck to choose, and then once it was the deck to choose, Merfolk completely fell off the radar.
Yeah.
And, yeah, we can see why.
I mean, we can see what Brian can hope to board in to help himself here. He does have 2 copies of Threads of Disloyalty, so he can't take a Stoneblade Mystic if that's what he wants.
Not the most efficient answer.
I would agree with you there. There are also 2 copies of Kira Great Glass Spinner, which are okay. He also has 2 copies of Umezawa's Jite of his own.
Probably has to bring those in.
Yeah, actually probably has to bring those in. And you know, it kind of sucks for Brian that he doesn't have access to white mana in his deck. And the reason I say that is because he can actually Phantasmal Image a Stoneblade Mystic and then put into play Zawashite via the Stoneblade Mystic ability, but he's just going to have to hard cast it. Yeah, he can just hard cast it straight up, but, you know, it would be nice to be able to cheat it into play, not have to worry about counter magic.
I actually did, when the first Stoneforge decks were coming out, I was playing, after I was playing Stoneforge, I decided, you know, to mix it up a little, and I was playing the Natural Order Bant deck. I had Phantasmal Image, and I had Batterskull in my sideboard that I would bring in to image my opponent's Stoneforge Mystic and put in the Batterskull.
Oh,
so
look at you.
That interaction has come up for me in the past, but yep, imaging a Stoneforge Mystic to find a JIT is a fairly fine line, but really, Nick's gonna have access to more theoretical copies, and he has the Batterskull, which pretty hard to beat for Merfolk.
Pretty tough, pretty tough. Brian's going to need to get off to, I mean, I'd say he wants to get off to a better start, but I actually don't really think his start was that bad that game. He had multiple Lords, he had Curse Catchers to actually start on turn 1. Curse Catcher, a card I don't particularly love in the Merfolk deck, but it does get the ball rolling, and he did have, again, Lord of Atlantis, Match of the Pearl Trident, and another Curse Catcher, so he certainly had an aggressive draw, but Stoneforge Mystic stopped that real fast.
Well, let's look at some other cards in Nick's deck that are also unbelievably good against Merfolk.
Sure.
Because there are a lot of them. Thoughtseize, completely fine against Merfolk.
Yep.
You take their Lords, you take their Silvergill Atlantis, you take their Counterspell to make sure their counter magic, not counterspell the card, but their force of will, to make sure that your Stoneforge Mystic resolves and survives. He has a Supreme Verdict, which is the perfect card against Merfolk. Once again, uncounterable, obviously very important, kills all the Merfolk. Clean, simple. He has one main and another on the board. And Lingering Soul's not too bad either. Really, it's just...
Merfolk is a walk in the park for Merfolk.
Merfolk really has their work cut out for him in this matchup. Historically, and it holds true today. I'm not gonna mince words. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. It is a bad matchup. There aren't a lot of like 90-10 matchups in Legacy because the format's so open, because there are so many powerful cards in all the decks. It very rarely happens, but this is one example of it. It's very hard for Merfolk to win.
Yeah. You know, if maybe there weren't Snapcaster Mages to go along with those swords and stuff like that, you know, maybe if there was just like a little bit less of everything, then he'd be able to do okay. But this is a matchup where Nick's deck is full of answers that are both proactive and reactive. Reactive, of course, in the spot removal, proactive in the fact that he can cast Stoneforge Mystic, and if it resolves, it's Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah.
Because the Batterskull's coming to town, and Batterskull is the end boss in this matchup.
And the discards, and the Lingering Souls, Force of Wills to protect it, Engineer Explosives, Vindicate, and Verdict to buy time if he doesn't have the cheaper removal. He's got plenty of basics, a swamp, 2 islands, and 2 plains to keep himself wasteland-proof. It's a nightmare.
Well, Curse Catcher is going to lead things off for Brian. You see his hand, he has another island, he has a Silvergill Adept, he has a Master of the Pearl Trident, so he actually has things that he can do, as we do see Nick is going to sacrifice his Flooded Strand and search out, not a Taiga. Looks like you might see an Underground Sea here, as he's going through that deck pretty quickly.
I imagine it's a basic in the dark.
Okay.
There we go.
You win. You win the game.
I've played this deck before. I've played this matchup before. So we've talked about how bad the matchup is. Let's talk about what Merfolk can do to win. I think that Stoneforge Mystic is a must counter. You gotta have the Daze or the Force of Will for that. And I think that attacking Esper's mana is the best way to go about this. Sadly for Brian, Nick does have the fetch land for the basic there. You kind of have to hope that they're on mono duels and that you can get Wasteland Curse Catcher type of draws. And that's it's not happening so far, but Silvergill Adept, Goblin Piker Plus, draw a card, pretty good.
Yeah, as you do see, Brian is going to reveal a Master of the Pearl Trident, so he's already getting off to a pretty quick start. I mean, the longer the game goes, the worse it is for Brian, so he does have to get off to these early starts that involve Curse Catcher into, you know, another creature, into a Lord to start bolstering the team, or just start running off as many Lords as possible and use those islands to his advantage. You know, that's what it takes to get the job done here, is you're going to see a Brainstorm here cast by Nick, and he's playing it you know, he could have possibly played a land. We don't know if he has land in his hand, but he's playing it right now into the Curse Catcher, basically daring Brian to counter it with Curse Catcher, and you see he's going to daze it instead.
He's going to Curse Catcher it from his hand.
Yes.
Keep the 1/1 in play. It is a clock, especially with this Lord coming down on this turn. That represents an extra damage from the Curse Catcher, and this is the type of draw that the Merfolk deck needs to win. Fast clock, some disruption, and not a nut draw from the Esper opponent.
Yeah. And so you do see Nick is going to sack that Polluted Delta on the end step. He's going to search himself out a basic Swamp.
Basics for days. That is the key.
And so what Brian has in his hand right now, he has another Curse Catcher, he has an island, and he has a Kira Great Glass Spinner, a card that we'll bring up on the screen once he does cast it. And that Kira is going to allow him to fade some of the spot removal, some of the reactive cards that Nick has to kind of break up these things. And hopefully for Brian, that'll be fast enough to get the job done before, you know, Supreme Verdicts come to town or anything else, as you see a brainstorm here from Nick.
The big thing about Kira is that you actually need to play it pretty quickly on curve. Otherwise, you know, you get to the situation where mass removal and counter magic and all this stuff comes online. You want to play it on curve to sort of bottleneck the Swords to Plowshares type effects rather than the Supreme Verdict type effects. And here we do see the cheap removal spell, Swords to Plowshares, taking out the Lord and significantly hurting Brian Boss's clock. Force of Will drawn for turn. So he's got Kira this turn with Force backup and the Curse Catcher. This is a very good draw from Brian Boss. As we were saying, this is the type of draw that he needs to win. And all of that aside, if Nick Carlson just has one of his 2 Supreme Verdicts here, none of it matters. And
so
it looks like he
does.
That's what he has.
So Supreme Verdict is going to take care of those guys, and we know the Merfolk deck AJ has absolutely no reach whatsoever.
So far, so booked.
He has to reassemble everything.
Yeah, Wasteland, not the best after the turn 4. The Supreme Verdict, uncounterable, doesn't care about the Curse Catcher, even though Nick doesn't have any extra land, doesn't care about the Force of Will. Just the perfect card in the perfect spot, perfectly timed. Everything is perfect.
Yeah, perfect this,
perfect
that.
Perfect.
Lingering Souls with the perfect tokens.
Sure. Now here's the like offense and defense, super fast, super resilient win condition. Aether Vial and embarrassing.
But wait, Aether Vial's here.
Aether Vial, straight up embarrassing at this point in the game. Brian Boss knows how bad this matchup is. He did what he could. He couldn't play around the Supreme Verdict.
No,
surely.
not at all. Not at all.
And just had to hope that there wasn't another White Source plus a Verdict in hand.
But no big deal, just a Batterskull here.
All I
with
have is a
German token.
Batterskull. All I have is a Batterskull.
If you guys can't tell this is a bad matchup, maybe you want to debate.
Yeah, if you were in the chat saying, no, AJ, it's not as bad as you think. Merfolk can win, definitely. I don't know. I'm not lying to you people. I'm really not. I've played this format before. I've played these decks before. It is that bad.
Your argument is pretty convincing with the way these 2 games have played out.
Yep.
Batterskull.
And let me tell you, Cedric, this is not an anomaly. This is just very textbook. This is just what happens every time.
I mean, you just see the cards that Nick is casting, how much more powerful individually they are than Brian's cards. You know, he plays a Lingering Souls that he can flash back. That card's gonna buy him enough time, but it can also be proactive and kill the opponent. Batterskull, way more powerful than anything Brian's doing. Jace the Mind Sculptor has now just showed up. Way more powerful than anything Brian's doing. Supreme Verdict to clear everything and it can't be countered. Way more powerful than what Brian's doing.
And a perfect answer to what Brian's answers to answers would be.
Yes.
It's a nightmare. Absolute nightmare.
As Brian draws, I mean, he's drawing spells, you know, he's not flooding out and drawing Mutavaults and Wastelands, which, you know, would be okay draws. You know, he's drawing what you can argue are like the best cards he can draw right now in, you know, Lords and stuff, and now you have a Source of Plowshares that's going to take care of this Lord of Atlantis. And Brian's going to pick up everything else along with the Lord. So
no, Brian, what are you doing? It's just the Swords to Plowshares. It only kills one of your cards.
Brian's actually gone. The screen's black. He's actually just poof. That's how one-sided it was. He's just gone.
Yeah, Brian Boss, I talked to him very briefly during the player meeting. He knows the deck's a little outdated. He doesn't play as much anymore. It's a fairly straightforward deck, one he has experience with, but he's got to know how bad this matchup is, and was just hoping to fade it or get a little lucky. Didn't work out this time, but It is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't work out.